The new Powerbeats Pro 2 wireless earbuds are surprisingly good at heart rate tracking, and they do it all inside your ear whilst providing pretty good audio quality at the same time. But they're also extremely frustrating to use, and I'm not alone in this. After trying to connect them to several heart rate tracking apps, I looked online and saw that Shervin from Shervin Shares, DC Rainmaker and Desfit all had the same issue. This product, which is basically made for Apple devices, works better on Android, at least in some ways, and it goes beyond just the hardware and firmware. There's actually no user manual included with the Powerbeats Pro 2, but there is this handy dandy QR code. However, after scanning it and clicking through how to pair the device, you end up at some generic Beats user guide, which is just totally useless. Ray from DC Rainmaker literally made a more usable and comprehensive user guide than the company that actually produces the product, and judging by the amount of content he's able to push out, he probably did it in his coffee break. But all kidding aside, even though the heart rate tracking is actually surprisingly good, as you'll see in a moment, this feels like an unfinished and hard to use product, and I really don't get it. It feels like maybe a month of extra work by a decent firmware team and some proper testing could have easily solved this. But before getting to the testing, let me quickly summarize my usability frustrations with this device. The Powerbeats Pro 2 are made to easily pair with iPhone, similar to the Apple Airpods for instance. They just pop up on your iPhone screen, you tap pair and done. It really works. But after you've connected it to your iPhone, the heart rate tracking functionality seems to be basically disabled. I couldn't connect it to any phone or watch I tried it on, neither on Android, Apple or even my Garmin watches. However, when you remove the Powerbeats from your iPhone and you pair them with an Android phone, which means putting it in pairing mode and connecting it the old-fashioned way via Bluetooth yourself, and that actually seems to work well, and this separate Bluetooth connection for the heart rate monitoring is actually available. Interestingly, there are very few apps available on iPhone to connect the Powerbeats to. Even the exact same app will work on Android but not on iPhone. For instance, one of my favorite apps, the Polar Beat app, works perfectly fine on Android and I can connect the Powerbeats, but nothing shows up on the exact same app on iPhone. So that's been mine and many other reviewers' experience with setting up the Powerbeats. Oh, and I need to mention one more annoying feature. To enable the Bluetooth mode for the heart rate monitor, you need to do a short click followed by a long click on either of the earbuds. But somehow this is quite sensitive in terms of timing, so about half of the time I end up switching to transparency mode instead of turning on the heart rate monitor. But okay, enough complaining about the functionality. Hopefully this can be fixed with firmware, though as a famous YouTuber once said, don't buy tech based on the promise of future software updates. But still, one can hope. But as I said, let's move on to the actual heart rate testing. Now, the PPG heart rate sensors of the Powerbeats are actually sort of on this forward-facing part of the earbuds. In this zoomed-in view, you can see it better. This means they're measuring your heart rate on this flappy part or tongue in front of your ear canal. I should say I and probably nobody has an exact idea of how the algorithm works of calculating your heart rate, because both earbuds measure your heart rate. Somehow it must get a consensus heart rate between them. Probably it uses both signals to get the cleanest possible signal, but we honestly have no idea how it exactly works. But yeah, that's how the earbuds are designed. The way I actually tested the heart rate tracking performance is by using the Polar H10 ECG chest strap as a reference, which is one of the most reliable ways of measuring your heart rate. And then I compared the heart rate measurements of the Powerbeats Pro 2 to this. As always, we'll look at the performance during different types of exercises, and in this video we'll focus on 4 different exercises: indoor cycling, outdoor running, and weightlifting. I did a total of 14 workouts with the Powerbeats Pro 2, and this also includes a roughly 100-mile bike ride, where I actually managed to deplete the entire battery of the Powerbeats Pro 2s, but more on that later. Let's start with the results for indoor cycling, which are displayed right here. Indoor cycling is relatively easy since there's not that much motion. Now, this plot shows an overview of the 3 indoor cycling sessions I did with the Powerbeats, where I compared them to the reference device along the horizontal axis, and the Powerbeats Pro 2 are along the vertical axis. Each dot in this plot is a single heart rate measurement, and if they would perfectly agree, all points should be on or at least close to this blue line. And as you can see, luckily that's generally the case. Still, there are a few points here below the blue line. It's not that many, but something is going on here, and the correlation is quite good, which is this R value up here. So this R value cannot be higher than 1.00, as regular viewers will know. So a correlation of 0.98 is actually pretty good. But let's take a look at the individual rides to see why there are still a few points below the blue line right here. And here we have the first example interval spinning session with along the horizontal axis the clock time and my heart rate along the vertical axis. In blue-green is the reference device, and in red we have the results of the Powerbeats Pro 2. And as you can see, the Powerbeats Pro 2 overlap almost perfectly with the reference device. So this spinning session is basically spot on, I would say. There's maybe some minor deviations here in the beginning where I didn't detect these full quick dips in heart rate, but this is extremely minor, so this would be perfectly good for me. This second ride right here, I actually started it late, but it still looks really good. And this third one also looks really good, though here we can see that some of these quick changes in heart rate weren't fully picked up on, and that's why there were some points below the blue line before. Still, this is super minor and this would definitely be good enough for me. So for indoor cycling, the Powerbeats Pro 2 seems to be doing a good job, but let's put these results into perspective of many other devices out there. And that's displayed in this overview right here, where that correlation or R value we're looking at before is along the horizontal axis, and along the vertical axis I ordered the watches from worst to best. That means that the further to the right and the higher the device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And here I marked the Powerbeats Pro 2 in red. And this actually looks really good. It's among some of the top performers. But of course it's a bit difficult to read, so let's zoom into some of the better performing watches. And that's displayed right here. So these are all devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And even amongst these, the Powerbeats Pro 2 are among some of the top devices. Not the absolute top, so the best performers are in this case different Apple watches and the Pixel Watch 3 and maybe some Huawei devices, but I would say that the Powerbeats Pro 2 can actually compete with these Huawei devices. So they're in sort of the second, maybe close to first tier of devices. So definitely good enough. I have not much to complain about here. So that looks really good, and for this relatively easy exercise the performance is quite impressive, especially since it was on average about 14 degrees Celsius in my room while doing the exercise, so just 14 degrees above freezing. This means that even though the blood flow to my ears was potentially somewhat restricted, this didn't influence the performance of the Powerbeats. Next, let's take a look at a much harder exercise, running outside. I actually did 2 runs with the Powerbeats, however for one of them the data was not logged or lost for some reason. Now I'm not sure if this was the fault of the Polar Beat app or of the Powerbeats, but this is just the data we have to work with. But before doing that, do you like these videos and do you want to get early access to results and do you also want to support me in making these videos? Then please consider becoming a YouTube member. I've been running this channel next to my full-time job as a scientist for several years, but I need some of your help to keep it going. So if you want to support me in paying my editor Alex and get some perks in return, check out the link up here or down here. Thanks so much for considering it, and let's get back to the testing. And here you can see a similar overview to before, but now for running. And even though the correlation isn't bad at 0.94, we can definitely see something is going wrong here. So even though the points are somewhat close to the blue line, here in the higher heart rate range, there's a big cloud of points here above the blue line, and then later on they're a bit below the blue line. So right here, it might be it's detecting a continuous heart rate, which isn't actually my heart rate, but my cadence, so the frequency at which I'm running. But we'll see that in a moment in the individual running session. And in addition, we see right here, it also detected a slightly too high heart rate. Again, this could be cadence lock. Here we really need to take a look at the individual run. As I said before, I had 2, but one of them for some reason the data wasn't saved, so we just have 1 to look at for now. And here we have the run itself. It was a relatively short interval run, so with a warm-up, then a couple of intervals and a cool down. But here we can definitely see what the problem is. So the red line of the Powerbeats Pro, especially near the end, detected quite a too high heart rate. And here I think it was really locking onto my cadence. Maybe earlier on right here, it also could have been a cadence problem because it's close to the frequency I was running right here as well. So again, cadence is the frequency at which you're running, and that's usually close to the frequency of your heart rate. And because that also causes a signal in the watch, it has difficulty discerning between the heart rate signal and the cadence signal. Luckily, I use the Garmin watch in combination with a chest strap from Garmin, which also measures my cadence. So let's see if, especially near the end of my run right here, my cadence was around 160-65 steps per minute. If that's the case, this is a definite sign of cadence lock. And indeed, we can see that here near the end of my run, my cadence was usually somewhere between like 160, 165 BPM. So in this moment right here, it was 163. So I definitely say that during this run, there was an instance of cadence lock going on. So it wasn't able to discern between my heart rate and my cadence. And that could be a problem for some of you runners out there that were thinking about getting the Powerbeats Pro 2. And again, this is an overview where we want the devices to be as far to the top right as possible. And based on correlation, the Powerbeats Pro 2 in red right here aren't doing that bad. But of course, this is a bit deceiving since correlation doesn't fully take into account this cadence lock problem. I would actually judge that the Powerbeats Pro 2 weren't good enough, even though they had a decent correlation at 0.94. I'm also now working on some other metrics which might be able to define this better, but I haven't fully worked them out for now. I would say if you want good heart rate tracking, some of these devices up here are definitely better choices. As regular viewers will know, the Apple Watch is an amazing heart rate tracker. Also, the Pixel Watch Watch 3 on Android does really well. I forgot to put it in this overview, but it's a really good heart rate tracker. Or if you want to go a bit cheaper, the Pixel Watch 2 was already pretty decent. So those are definitely some good options. Also, the Whoop strap isn't bad, though it also has some issues. It's in the second tier of devices, and even though it's close to the Powerbeats Pro 2, I believe the Powerbeats Pro 2 have bigger problems than the Whoop strap. But here I actually need to start coming up with a better metric, especially for running. But these are the metrics I've implemented for now. So for running, we see the first cracks appearing in the performance of the Powerbeats Pro 2. There are some definite signs of cadence lock, and this could be a significant issue for anyone looking to use the Powerbeats for running. Next, let's take a look at the performance of the Powerbeats for what is typically a harder exercise for smartwatches to track, cycling outside. This is harder because of the bumpiness and also because of the tension on your arms when you're holding onto the handlebars. However, here the Powerbeats might have an advantage, since my body might dampen some of the bumpiness my head actually experiences, and of course there's no tension in my ears. On the other hand, since temperatures are hovering just about freezing here in Vienna, my ears might get quite cold, and this could negatively influence the heart rate tracking performance. So let's look at the performance for outdoor cycling. I did a total of 7 short bike rides and 1 very long, about 100-mile bike ride. Let's start by looking at the results for the long bike ride, but first, past Rob will tell you about the battery testing and the heart rate tracking during that long bike ride.
It's 7 AM on a Saturday right now. It's literally freezing outside, and hopefully at least I'm gonna complete a 157-kilometer workout. So it's rather cold out, which will affect the blood flow to my ears. I'll also bring something to put over my ears and see if that affects the heart rate performance.
Layers are important.
But the maximum temperature should be reached today is about 4 degrees above freezing, so not a lot. But let's see how the Powerbeats perform and also how their battery holds up. So it's gonna be about 6 to 7 hours of active biking, but there will be some stops along the way. So maybe I'm gone for 8 hours total. Let's see how long it takes me. And I actually fully charged them before I left, so let's see how they hold up.
Okay, so we're 2 hours in. I hope you can hear me with all the wind and stuff. But, there we go. So far they're working quite well. The audio quality is decent. The heart rate tracking seems to be working. But I'll see you maybe during the next break or otherwise back in the studio, and we'll analyze the data.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm back. That was much more exhausting than I thought. There was a lot of headwind, but I'm happy to say I actually rode long enough for the Powerbeats Pro 2 to die. So it was about 9 hours in my ride, I think. Let me see how long it was exactly. So I started my ride at 8:19 AM, and I think I started listening to music maybe 10 minutes before, so let's say 8:10, and they died close to 5 PM. So that's a little under 9 hours of battery time, where I both listened to an audiobook the whole time. So I actually almost finished Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir at 1.6x speed, a really good book. But yeah, a little under 9 hours with both heart rate monitoring and audiobook listening, so quite okay. And as I understand it, in terms of sound manipulation, at the most energy efficient mode, so no transparency mode or anything. So I think they advertise about 10 hours. It's not clear to me, I can look it up if this actually includes heart rate monitoring or not, but a little under 9 hours is okay-ish. You can decide if that's good enough for you. But I really need to recover, and I still need to analyze all the data. So let's go to future Rob, who knows all about the data and the data analysis.
So the battery life is pretty okay, I would say. On the website they state a 10-hour battery life with active noise cancellation and transparency mode turned off. But of course I also had the heart rate monitoring turned on. But what about the heart rate tracking performance during outside cycling? Let's take a look. But first, if you're finding these videos interesting, it really helps me get access to new devices sooner and helps reach more people if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Pressing those 2 buttons really makes a huge difference, and commenting of course also helps. I would really appreciate it. Thanks so much for considering, and let's get back to the testing. And this overview for running right here actually looks pretty good. Yes, there are some points here below the blue lines here in the lower heart rate range, and also a few in the higher heart rate range. But this is really minimal. There's a lot of points in this overview, and most of them are super close to the blue line. The correlation is also pretty good at 0.94. It's the same as we had for running, but for cycling outside, this is actually really good. And we also don't see these kind of big clouds of points just above or below the blue line. Most points are super close, so I'm quite happy with this. But let's take a look at the individual rides to see if there's still some weird artifacts. And let's start with that very long bike ride. Again, the Powerbeats Pro 2 are marked in red and the reference device is marked in blue-green. And overall, this looks really good, honestly. The overall patterns at least match very well between the Powerbeats Pro 2 and the reference device. And it was quite chilly out. It was close to freezing when I started and maybe got up to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius, so just a few degrees above freezing. And given that that was the case, this actually looks really good. Also, part of the time my ears weren't covered by anything, so I'm quite impressed by that. We cannot really see the details in this. So for instance, right here, I don't know if you can see it, but it seems like some of the details are lost. So let's take a look at some of the shorter rides, see what the details look like. So here we have one short ride. Again, the reference in blue-green mostly overlaps really well with the Powerbeats Pro 2. Only right here in the beginning and a bit later on where there's some delays in picking up on an increase in heart rate. So right here it missed that peak in heart rate. And also right here there was a small delay. Compared to many other devices, this isn't bad, but this is a small mistake by the Powerbeats Pro 2. But let's take a look at some other ride. This second ride actually more or less has the same problem, especially here in the beginning. There were 2 moments where I think it just stopped detecting my heart rate. So I'm not sure if it just loses signal and then the app just keeps detecting the same heart rate or the earphones keep sending out the same heart rate. Of this, I'm not sure. Still, this is relatively minor. This bike ride actually looks really good, so the Powerbeats Pro 2 did really well. And also this bike ride again has the same kind of small artifact here in the beginning, but otherwise looks really good. Same goes for this bike ride. Again, some small artifacts, some missing heart rates that were detected as the same heart rate. And also right here. So generally not much to complain about. There are these short delays, but given the current temperatures outside and that these are relatively minor missing values, overall this is pretty good. And of course, we again want to put these results into the context of many other devices out there. And here we have the Powerbeats Pro 2 marked in red. And they're really among some of the better performing devices. But as before, these labels are quite hard to read, so let's zoom in a bit. So here we have just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And the Powerbeats Pro 2 are doing really well, honestly. They're doing about as well as the Apple Watch Ultra 2 that I wore with the metal straps. So one of the harder straps for an Apple Watch to measure your heart rate with because it's not that tight and shifts a lot on the wrist. Of course, Apple Watches with more appropriate straps do a lot better. So these are really the top performers, closely followed by the Pixel Watch 3, which is an amazing heart rate tracker on Android. So the Apple Watch and Pixel Watch are still my top choices for heart rate tracking. Also the Huawei Watch Fit 2 and 3 aren't bad. But the Powerbeats Pro 2 are also doing really well if you don't feel comfortable wearing something on your wrist or you just need some earphones and you also want heart rate tracking. The Powerbeats Pro 2 might just be good enough, except of course for the fact that the implementation of the firmware isn't great, so we'll have to see if that gets fixed. But overall, at least in terms of performance, I'm not disappointed.
That looks pretty decent, at least in my opinion, especially considering the temperature. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. The Powerbeats sometimes struggle with really fast changes in heart rate, but otherwise these results are pretty good. This shows the clear advantage of not measuring your heart rate on the wrist like a smartwatch, but instead measuring it in the ear. And a situation where that's an even bigger advantage is for weightlifting. When weightlifting, most smartwatches either detect the wrong heart rate when you're doing a set, or in the case of something like the Apple Watch, it just stopped detecting your heart rate. This is because of the extremely high tension on the wrist and arm when doing an actual set. However, this is not a problem when you measure your heart rate in your ear, so let's see how the Powerbeats Pro 2 did.
And here we have the overview for weightlifting, which honestly looks really good. I'm not disappointed with this. I had a suspicion it might do well since there's not that much movement and because there's no tension in my ears, it should do well. But I'm happy to see it actually did well. So most points are really close to blue line. There's a few here just below it. So in a moment in the individual sessions, we'll see how big this problem actually is. But overall, this is better than 99%, maybe even 100% of watches out there. The only thing I'm really curious about is to see if it stops detecting my heart rate in some moments like smartwatches do. If that isn't the case, this could actually be the best option out there for heart rate tracking during weightlifting. This was the first weightlifting session I did, and this was actually a leg day. So this was generally already an easy exercise for smartwatches. But we can see that the Powerbeats Pro 2 did really well. Only at the peak, some small details were missed. But overall, I don't really have anything to complain about here. And this second session, which I think was biceps and back, here it actually did really well. There's one peak right here where I didn't fully detect a peak in my heart rate. So for a moment, it probably lost heart rate signal right here. But overall, this looks really good. This is the first PPG-based heart rate tracker where I have some confidence in it tracking my heart rate during weightlifting, and that's saying something. So overall, I'm quite happy with this performance. And again, of course, we want to put this into some perspective comparing it to other devices out there. And as you can see, the Powerbeats Pro 2 are really amongst the top performers. So here in this zoomed in view, we have just the devices with a correlation of 0.7 or higher. And amongst these, the Powerbeats Pro 2 are among some of the top performers. So even among some of the better devices, at least based on this testing, it's really the single best device out there, I would say. The Apple Watches sometimes have a slightly higher correlation, but Apple Watches just stop detecting your heart rate at some of the peaks. So they don't detect the wrong heart rate, so it doesn't affect their correlation value, but they're just missing a lot of heart rate measurements. So effectively still not measuring your heart rate that accurately, but it isn't reflected in this overview. If we would take that into account, the Powerbeats Pro 2 would be the best device out there, at least for heart rate tracking during weightlifting with a PPG sensor in my testing. So of course some other testing might shift it around a little bit, but I think just the positioning of the heart rate sensor makes a big difference. For weightlifting, the Powerbeats Pro 2 appeared to be the best available non-ECG device I've tested so far. They detected my heart rate relatively accurately with few to no dropouts. In some ways this isn't surprising since they're located on a part of the body that isn't really actively involved in lifting, giving them the best possible chance to track my heart rate accurately. However, I was still a bit worried they wouldn't be up to the task. Looking at the overall performance of the Powerbeats Pro 2, they actually do pretty well, as you can see in this overview right here. And we can actually see that very nicely in this overview right here. So here I tried to summarize all results we've just looked at. Along the horizontal axis, I plotted different exercises I did. So spinning, which is indoor cycling, outdoor cycling, running, and weightlifting. And along the vertical axis, we have that correlation value. Each dot is a different device that I tested, and I marked the Powerbeats Pro 2 in red in each of the exercises. There are two values, so two numbers you see, the correlation, so this R value, and also this PERS, which stands for percentage or percentile, which is the percentage of devices that did worse than the device we're now looking at, so the Powerbeats Pro 2. So for instance, this 83% right here for spinning means that 83% of devices did worse than the Powerbeats Pro 2 and 17% did better. Or right here for biking, for instance, we see that the Powerbeats Pro 2 did better than 85% of the devices out there. For running, it wasn't quite as good, and also the correlation isn't the best value to look at. Still, it's at the 65th percentile. And as I said, for weightlifting, it is basically the best device out there. Its percentile is 96, so it's at the 96th percentile, meaning that 4% of devices would theoretically still be better. However, this doesn't take into account that all devices with a higher correlation were Apple devices, and all of these just stopped detecting your heart rate for moments. So if we take all of that into account, the Powerbeats Pro 2 are really the best for weightlifting. One of the best for spinning, not the absolute best, but close to it. Similar for biking. They're not amazing for running though. I would be curious when Rafael is back from his holiday if we test it on him, if we get similar results. So if also cadence lock is a problem for him. These are the results we have now. Do with it what you will. If you're a runner, I'm not sure if we would get the Powerbeats Pro 2 for heart rate tracking in general. Until they solve the firmware problems, I'm not sure I would get them at all. But these are the results we have. So for anything but running, based on the testing I've done so far, I can really recommend the Powerbeats Pro 2 for their heart rate tracking performance. However, in terms of usability, a lot remains to be desired. On Android, it's actually pretty okay, though there are still some slight annoyances there. On iPhone, on the other hand, the heart rate tracking appears to need some fixing, and this feels like a bad omen for the Powerbeats Pro 2. If they couldn't get them properly working on launch, are these earbuds going to get proper support and updates over the next few years? I guess only time will tell. All I can do is show you the data and share my experiences, and now you can decide what to do with these results. Now, if you want to get sneak previews on results, consider becoming a YouTube member, and if you decide to get the Powerbeats Pro 2, a Whoop strap, an Oura ring, an H-Sleep Pod 4, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, and you want to support the channel and save some money, there are different affiliate links in the description below that not cost you any extra, and some give a discount. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Powerbeats, I think you might like this video on the H-Sleep Pod 4 or this video on the Whoop strap. Thank you so much for watching, and catch you in the next video.